Good morning. Our work I will try to present you today is about using bioinspiration for developing ecological simulation models. In the more common sense, bioinspiration is considered as using natural solution to solve engineering questions. For example, solve robotic question using artificial intelligence. But conversely, in biosocial eco-modeling, questions related to biology or the environment are most often resolved by abstract models of a field studied. For example, here, modeling an epidemic process using a differential equation. Models can be also of the artificial intelligence and bioinspired type, but also in this case, they are abstracted to answer a question which is different from the bioinspired model. So in any of these situations, there is an assumed gap between question and model, and these are called the strategic models. And this is the most widespread approach, since it is efficient and tractable. However, in biosocial-ecological modeling, this approach may restrain models' application to the particular use case they are fitted to or trained on. For example, here you have a study of the epidemic risk linked to rodents in a village in the African Sahel, and you have a wide variety of components. Each component may vary independently or dependently through time, and so it is very difficult to fit a model which is not close and stuck to the real working of the system. So there is an alternative to strategic model that is called tactical models, and this is modeling trying to model nature as it works. When problems are multi-scale, multi-process, multi-actor, this tactical model may provide robustness and predictability. These are mostly used in microbiology and cell modeling and plant growth, such as functional structural plant models. In this work, we try to develop at a larger scale a synthetic ecology in the application domain of the researches on wide rodent bioecology. Rodents are known as agricultural and domestic pests, and they are also studied as they are reservoirs of various zoonotic diseases. The question we asked in this work was first, is it possible to use the expert knowledge on rodent to develop a bioinspired synthetic ecology of rodent populations? And secondly, are the classical computer methodology used, such as object-oriented or agent-based models, adequate to develop such tactical model? The model purpose was then the long-term elaboration of a synthetic ecology simulator using bioinspired mechanism coming from rodent experts, with the following expected constraints or outcomes. The model had to be comprehensive and integrative so as to take into account every sources of variation that occur in nature. It has been generic and multipurpose to account for the different questions that the expert can pose on the ecology of rodents. And it had to provide reliable indicators similar to those experts are accustomed to. So on the whole, we try to build an interaction medium using this model between complex reality and disciplinary expert scientists. First, this work was realized as embedded in a team of rodent experts in a laboratory, and we first did an overview of trying to overview the specialist knowledge, and this was realized by means of interviews of the different experts and trying to depict what are the concepts and method they use. This raised to a huge huge domain of various concepts and methods and domains studied by these experts. And even when trying to make a typology of this model, of this expertise, we saw that there was a wide variety of biological entities, very different concept, phenomenon, processes accounted for, and those were studied at different spatial and temporal scales. And also the measures or indicators used were very different. And finally, after interviewing and analysis the result of these experts, it appeared that designing a synthetic ecology from scratch proved not tractable, and we had to find another way to do it. So the approach we have retained as an heuristic was not to develop a model from scratch, but rather to grow it from different use cases with the following principle. So we've tried iteratively to formalize successive use cases. Each use cases carries new facets of the domain, and at each step we integrate the new and former model concept into a synthetic ecology that was objectivated. And so we iteratively progress toward this. For example, here we had first use case on agricultural dynamic landscape and rodent evolving on it, where we try to model the landscape interaction. We also work on the individual behaviors. On a second other use case, we try to model the genetic processes of reproduction, formalizing chromosomes and mitosis and so on. This was validated by reproducing a laboratory experiment of hybridization between different species, where we could study the genetic processes and also trying to reproduce the indicators used by the experts. Another use case, for example, is trying to formalize the black rat colonization of Senegal over the past century, and realizing this using different spatial temporal multiscales that were studied by the expert. So we tried to formalize nested spaces, and this led to high resolution modeling of the various the biodiversity of the agent occurring in the process of epidemic risks. For example, here you have a downtown village, and with human mouse, ticks and bacteria, and such as the example I presented you before. So over and over, iteratively, we could build what we forecast as a synthetic ecology, and in the result you can deal with the use and adequacy of computer programming to do this. First, it must be noticed that the iterative reworking of the model could be possible using refactoring, which was a very important functionality that we used in these heuristics. So as we progress in understanding the emerging architecture, the natural meaning of variables and method was refined, and we could fit it as much as possible to biological knowledge, and then progress towards bioinspiration. Refactoring hence gradually improved consistency, readability, genericity, and also maintenance of the growing model, as well as the backward compatibility with the all formalized use cases. And secondly, the computer paradigms we had available could be used for various bioinspired modeling. So we use these different kind of paradigms. I will detail one or two of them. For example, composition could be used for bioinspired modeling, using the composition of gene into chromosomes, into paired chromosomes, and into genome. Aggregation also was found very useful for bioinspired modeling, and particularly in the case that nature is a nested system. Everything is within something, and we then progressively went into a generic interface named container interface, and from which every object and agents in the model inherit. And these are characterized by four very simple processes, that is, entry into a container, exiting a container, entry of a content or exit of a content. And this root interface permitted to formalize very different kind of systems, all embedded within each other, such as, for example, here some example of container currently observable, such as a bacteria in a tick, in a rodent, in a nest, in a wall, in a household or in a village, or a human carrier within a truck, a road, a trade area, and so on. Each item is a Java class implementing the container interface. Inheritance, of course, was very useful for bio-inspired modeling, particularly here in the case that we could mimic the phylogenetic classification to represent multiple actors. This is the Darwinian phylogeny, and it is very similar, almost exactly similar to the tree hierarchy of inheritance. Each new branch inherits the characters of its ancestors. Inheritance is carried out by a transmissible genome that we formalize. So we formalize the transmissible genomes that we could put into agents, and they define the characteristics of each agent. And this was possible to realize it very generally for any kind of agent, such as rodent, human, birds, or vegetation. And using generalization, we could hence develop something like a database of any kind of object, and this was very robust to formalize, say, vegetation, rodents, or birds, and so on. Abstraction also was used for the synthetic ecology modeling. Here you have the example of the classes involved in a house mouse agent behavior from bottom to top, and from bottom to top progressively we had a hierarchy of abstract classes that could be used for any kind of agent, and defining the very bio-inspired phenomenon, such as following or living in a household, interact with humans, dig nest, reproduce, etc. Can be noticed here that the very top of the hierarchy can be used in many other contexts than rodent field domain. So to conclude, first about the growing model heuristic, the iterative approach proved tractable to progress towards a synthetic ecology. And with this method, even the earliest case studies still benefit from the whole, and hence they are continually improving. And the application of of the model to various contrasting case studies indicate that this approach provides a robust model that was searched for. And the computer paradigms that we use appear to us very adequate. They altogether constitute something like a rich toolbox, offering a varied set of possible uses to formalize bio-inspired landscape or ecology, and you can pick one or the other depending of the process that the biologist talk you about. There are some constraints. For example, funding multiple inheritance is a funding logic of nature, and it was not considered in this work, since coding multiple inheritance may give rise to inconsistencies in programming, and using it may question its relevance to mimic a real functioning of nature, since nature uses multiple inheritance with no inconsistencies. And also it must be noticed that while promising tactical models and the growing model paradigm still remain tough and a long-term approach. So this work was a more than 10 years work. So thank you very much for listening.